Sitting in the lawyer's office, I clenched my hands tightly, trying to suppress the anxiety rising within me. It wasn't because I was worried about the contents of my husband's will. I knew he had prepared everything carefully before he passed away. No, it was because I knew that the woman sitting across from me wouldn't accept the truth easily. Eleanor Whitmore, my mother-in-law, a sharp and ambitious woman, sat there with the demeanor of someone who had already won. She didn't bother hiding her smug half-smile, as if she were merely waiting for the lawyer to confirm what she believed to be true, that everything James, my husband, owned would soon belong to her. But she had no idea what was coming. James and I had been together for over 11 years, building our lives with our own hard work. He was a talented surgeon and I ran an interior design business. We weren't millionaires, but we had a warm home, a solid savings account, and most importantly, a happy marriage. Happy, at least until James was diagnosed with cancer. In the last 2 years of his life, I watched as the strong, resilient man I loved was slowly worn down by illness. It was a painful time, but James never stopped worrying about me. Even as he faced death, his biggest concern was that his mother wouldn't leave me alone after he was gone. And James was right. From the moment we first met, Eleanor disliked me. She looked at me with thinly veiled contempt, never bothering to hide her belief that I was nothing more than a gold digger, only after James for his money. She couldn't accept that her son had fallen in love with a woman who didn't fit her standards, someone from an upper-class family raised in wealth and privilege. Instead, I was independent, self-made, and that, to Eleanor, was unacceptable. I didn't care about her hatred, but James did. He spent years trying to earn his mother's approval, always hoping that one day she would love him unconditionally. But Eleanor's love always came with conditions. She wanted to control James, to dictate how he lived his life. When he married me, she saw it as a betrayal, and when he fell ill, things only got worse. She never came to care for him, never offered him comfort, but she was very interested in his assets. I will never forget what she said to me one night at the hospital while James was asleep. "Sooner or later the boy will be gone and you'll have nothing. That house, that money, it should belong to his family, not you." I didn't respond. I simply held James's hand tightly, silently promising him that I wouldn't let her take anything from us. And now, that promise was about to be fulfilled. Lawyer Robert Calloway adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began reading James's will. "I, James Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, ensuring that my assets are distributed according to my wishes." Eleanor remained seated, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. She truly believed that very soon she would own everything. "I leave my entire estate, including the house in Brookfield, my savings accounts, stocks, and all personal assets, to my wife Amelia Whitmore." Eleanor's smile froze. For a second, she looked as if she couldn't comprehend what she had just heard. Then, she narrowed her eyes, her lips stretching into a mocking grin. "Oh, she gets everything, does she? But I'm certain there's still something left for me." Robert paused for a moment, then pulled out another piece of paper. I noticed the corner of his mouth twitch slightly, as if he were holding back a reaction. "James also left a letter specifically for you, Mrs. Whitmore." I saw Eleanor raise an eyebrow. She took the paper with an air of disdain, as if convinced it was of no real importance. But as her eyes scanned the words, I watched the color drain from her face, first shock, then anger. Her hands clenched the paper so tightly that her knuckles turned white. By the time she reached the end, she slammed it down on the table. "This is a joke!" Eleanor roared, her voice shaking with fury. I reached for the letter. Lawyer Calloway nodded and handed me a copy. I read it, and a proud smile formed on my lips. "Mother, if you're reading this, you're probably thinking that you're about to take everything. But you need to understand one thing. You never controlled me, and you will not control my wife. You spent your whole life manipulating and forcing me into submission. But I found something real, something you could never touch. I found love. A life that belongs to me, not to you. I owe you nothing. Everything I have will go to the person who truly deserves it. Amelia, my wife, and you have nothing." The lawyer's office fell into silence. Eleanor sat there, her entire body trembling with rage. "No! This is impossible!" she shrieked, her eyes burning with fury. "I will sue! I will take back what is rightfully mine." I met her gaze, keeping my voice steady. "No, Eleanor, you never had anything to lose. And this battle? You lost it before it even began." Eleanor Whitmore was not the type of woman to accept defeat easily. As she stormed out of the lawyer's office that day, I knew this wasn't over. Some people, when beaten, learn to walk away. But not Eleanor. She was the kind of person who, when denied what she wanted, would rather destroy everything around her. It didn't take long for me to realize that. Just 1 week after James's will was made public, I received a notice from the court. Eleanor had filed a lawsuit. She accused me of taking advantage of James during his illness, claiming that our marriage was nothing more than a setup for me to seize his assets. Her lawsuit was filled with slanderous accusations, even presenting so-called evidence that I had prevented James from contacting his family in his final months. She declared that James had not been of sound mind when he wrote his will, and that everything should rightfully go to his real family, meaning herself. When my lawyer Robert Calloway informed me about the lawsuit, I wasn't surprised. But that didn't mean I wasn't afraid. "You don't need to worry. We have a legally binding will, and James's medical records prove he was completely lucid when he wrote it. She has no real evidence to back up her claims," Robert said confidently. I wanted to believe him, but I knew Eleanor didn't need proof. She only needed to create enough trouble to wear me down, to make me give up. For 2 months I was dragged into endless interrogations, forced to provide documents and records. Eleanor's lawyer threw out a barrage of absurd accusations, desperately trying to paint me as an opportunistic wife, who had manipulated her dying husband to steal his wealth. I sat before the judge, listening to Eleanor's sob, playing the role of a grieving mother robbed of her rightful inheritance. She told outright lies, claiming I had kept James from seeing her, that I had controlled him, that I had coerced him into changing his will when he was too weak to resist. I clenched my teeth, staying silent. I couldn't let her drag me into the mud with her. I believed in the evidence. I believed in the law. In the end, the court dismissed her case. There was no proof that my marriage to James was fraudulent. No documentation indicated that James had been coerced into changing his will. The judge didn't need long to conclude that Eleanor was simply grasping at straws, trying to take what wasn't hers. I should have felt relieved, but I couldn't, because I knew Eleanor was never the type to back down. Just days after losing the case, the harassment began. At first it was just phone calls. I ignored them, but after the 13th call in a single evening, I finally picked up. "You think you've won?" Her voice was icy. "Do you have no shame? That house should have been mine." I sighed. "You need to accept reality, Eleanor." She let out a low chuckle, a dangerous smile spread across her face. "Accept it. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will take everything back, and when you lose everything, you'll regret ever crossing me." She hung up. I set my phone down, a chilling sensation running down my spine. One morning, I opened my front door and found an eviction notice taped to it. It looked official, bearing the seal of a law firm I had never heard of. The document stated that I was illegally occupying the house and had 30 days to vacate the premises. Panicked, I called Robert immediately. "This is a forgery," he said the moment he saw it. "She's trying to scare you." I wanted to believe him, but the growing unease in my chest told me otherwise. A few days later, I discovered that my back door had been forced open. Nothing was stolen, but everything inside was ransacked. Furniture overturned, pictures torn apart, papers scattered across the floor. I called the police. They inspected the house but found no fingerprints, no evidence. "Could just be random vandalism," an officer suggested. But I knew better. I knew exactly who was behind this. The silent warnings didn't stop. A strange car parked outside my house every night. Sometimes, when I looked out the window, I could see someone sitting inside, watching me. The next morning I found my trash cans overturned, garbage shredded and thrown all over my front yard. Another day, a wilted bouquet of flowers was left at my doorstep. No note, no message. I knew Eleanor wanted me to feel hunted, and I knew I couldn't keep ignoring this. Then, one evening, she showed up at my front door. She stood there in the darkness, her eyes gleaming with arrogance. "Are you enjoying this game?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I stared at her, forcing myself to stay calm despite the anger rising inside me. "What game?" "The game of reclaiming what's rightfully mine?" She tilted her head, her cold smile unwavering. "I told you, Amelia. You may have won a battle, but the war is far from over." I stood there, my heart pounding. I knew Eleanor wasn't bluffing. And I knew this nightmare was only beginning. I knew Eleanor wouldn't stop, but I never expected her to go this far. 3 weeks after our last confrontation, I received a call from my lawyer, Robert Calloway. His voice was more serious than ever. Amelia, we have a big problem. I felt my stomach drop. What now? Eleanor just filed a new will with the court. She claims that James changed his mind before he died and decided to leave everything to her. I froze. A new will? That was impossible. James had told me 100 times that he had taken care of everything. He knew his mother would try to seize his assets, and he would never have let her win. It has to be fake, I said, forcing myself to stay calm. We can prove that, right? Robert sighed. We'll try, but she has a witness. My heart pounded in my chest. Who? There was a brief silence before Robert said a name that made my blood run cold. David Connors. I nearly dropped the phone. David Connors, James's best friend, the man who had been by his side since their college days, the man who had stood at his funeral and wept while delivering the eulogy, the man I had trusted. No way, I whispered, but I knew Robert wasn't joking. He signed an affidavit stating that he witnessed James sign the new will, just 1 month before he passed. I felt my stomach twist. A blatant, unforgivable lie. Without hesitation, I dialed David's number. The phone rang longer than usual before he finally picked up. Amelia? His voice sounded the same, but I could hear the tension in every word. What did you do? I asked bluntly, my voice cold. David was silent for a moment before he let out a heavy sigh. I didn't want to get involved in this, but Eleanor has a point. She said James changed his mind, that he felt guilty for cutting her off, and I cut him off. You're lying. David hesitated. I took a deep breath, trying to contain the fury burning inside me. How much did Eleanor pay you? This time he was silent longer. David, I gritted my teeth. Finally he spoke, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. She promised me $250,000. Rage ignited inside me like a wildfire. James trusted you, and you betrayed him for money? I had no choice, David replied weakly. I'm in debt. I didn't have another way out. I felt my entire body tremble. So you're willing to destroy James's legacy, help Eleanor steal everything from him just because you're in debt? Amelia, I don't want this to go any further. I'm just doing what Eleanor asked. I let out a cold laugh. Well, congratulations, David. You just walked into a legal nightmare. I hung up, my heart pounding. If Eleanor had gone this far, I needed something stronger to stop her. And Robert already had the answer. I sat in his office, my eyes locked on the screen as he opened a video file. The image appeared. James. My chest tightened as I saw his face. He looked thinner, his features gaunt from illness, but his eyes remained steadfast. He cleared his throat and stared straight into the camera. If someone is watching this video, then my mother has done exactly what I predicted, trying to steal everything I left for Amelia. I took a sharp breath. Mother, James said, his voice low and cold. If you're sitting in a courtroom right now thinking you can overturn my will, then you need to understand one thing. You can't. You can't control me anymore. And you can't control Amelia either. He paused, taking a deep breath. Amelia is not a gold digger. She was the only person who stood by me when I needed someone the most. When you abandoned me, she fought for me. And because of that, you have no right to take anything from her. My eyes burned with unshed tears. But James wasn't finished. And David? James suddenly locked eyes with the camera. I froze. I know you betrayed me. I gripped the armrest of my chair. Robert leaned back, his expression filled with shock. You think I didn't know about the meetings between you and my mother? James continued. You think I didn't see the money she secretly transferred to you? I know everything. James lifted a stack of papers and held them up to the camera. This is the proof. Wire transfers, messages, recordings. It's all here. And if my mother or you try to use a fake will to steal from me, Amelia will use this against you. James stopped, staring into the camera one last time. Mother, you always thought you were smarter than everyone, but this time you lost. The screen went dark. The silence in the room was so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat. Robert was the first to speak. We just got our hands on a weapon of mass destruction. I sat frozen in my chair, my eyes locked onto the black screen of the laptop. James's words still echoed in my mind, each syllable cutting deep into the filthy schemes of Eleanor and David. He knew. He had seen everything. And he had left me with a weapon strong enough to bring them both down. Robert closed the laptop and let out a long breath. Now we know exactly what we need to do. I nodded, a surge of determination rising within me. Eleanor thought she could manipulate the law, that she could use money and influence to crush me. But she had forgotten one thing. She no longer had James to protect her. We spent the next 3 days combing through every document James had left behind. Emails, bank statements, wire transfer records. Every detail had been meticulously collected by James. What we uncovered was more than just a forged will. Eleanor had been embezzling money from James' father's company for years. The amount was staggering. Over $2,700,000 had vanished through shell accounts, internal transfers, and shady investments. David, being someone James had trusted, had helped her cover it up, fabricating documents to legitimize the missing funds. They thought no one would ever find out. But James had seen everything. And he had been silently gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. Robert didn't waste a second. He called a friend at the FBI, sending over every document we had, along with James's recorded video. 2 days later, the investigation was officially launched. On the morning of the 3rd day, I woke up to urgent knocking at my door. When I opened it, Robert stood there, a rare smile on his face. They made their move. I turned on the TV immediately. A breaking news headline flashed across the screen. Eleanor Whitmore, indicted for financial fraud, FBI opens investigation. The next image made my breath catch. Outside Eleanor's mansion, a swarm of federal agents in navy blue uniforms were raiding the property, seizing documents. And in the middle of it all, Eleanor stood frozen, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. But the most satisfying sight came right after. David, handcuffed, being led away by FBI agents under the flashing lights of the press cameras. Gone was the smug confidence. Gone was the man who had so casually betrayed his best friend for money. He kept his head down, completely broken. The investigation moved faster than I had expected. With all the evidence James had left behind, combined with the FBI's relentless pursuit, Eleanor and David had nowhere to run. Their bank accounts were frozen, the financial firm Eleanor had been running was shut down, everything she had fought so hard to protect through her deceitful schemes crumbled in an instant. 4 months later, the trial began. I sat in the front row as Eleanor was escorted into the courtroom. She looked thinner, her face devoid of its usual arrogance, but her eyes still burned with hatred. She stared at me as if I were the sole reason for her downfall. But I wasn't afraid anymore. James had protected me, and now the truth had won. The judge delivered the final verdict. Eleanor was sentenced to 15 years in prison for financial fraud, money laundering, and forgery. David received 10 years for aiding and abetting. As the trial ended, I walked out of the courtroom, stepping into the fresh air. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. A week later, I received a letter from prison. Sender, Eleanor Whitmore. I sat in my chair, staring at the envelope, feeling absolutely nothing. I knew she would never change. I didn't need to read her venomous words to know that she still saw herself as the victim. That in her mind I had stolen everything from her. Without a word, I took the letter, walked out onto my porch, and dropped it into the fire. I didn't need to hear anything from her ever again. Eleanor had lost everything, and I had reclaimed my life. I stood in front of the house James and I had built together, my heart filled with conflicting emotions. This had been our home, a place filled with some of the happiest memories of my life. But it had also been a battlefield, a place where I had fought against a manipulative, greedy woman who had tried to destroy me in every way possible. Eleanor had lost. She sat behind bars with nothing left but her own bitterness. But I knew that if I clung to this house, I would remain trapped in memories of battles fought and wounds reopened. I didn't want that. I decided to sell the house. The buyers were a young couple full of energy and admiration for every detail of the home. When they stepped inside, I saw their eyes light up, just like James and I had once looked at this place on the day we first got the keys. That realization brought me peace. 3 weeks later, everything was finalized. I held the check in my hands, not as a trophy, but as a ticket to leave the past behind. I left the city, moving to a new place where no one knew my story, where no one whispered the name Eleanor Whitmore. I found a small apartment by the sea, a place where I could wake up to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, a place where I could breathe freely, no longer feeling watched or threatened. In those first few days in my new home, I spent hours reading through the letters James had written to me before he passed. In every line, I felt his love, his care, and the unwavering trust he had placed in me. You are stronger than you think, Amelia. If you're reading this letter, I want you to remember that you don't have to fight anymore. Live, enjoy, be happy. That's what I always wanted for you. Tears slid down my cheeks as I read those words, but not out of sorrow. It was because I understood James had always protected me, even after he was gone. Eleanor thought she could control everything. But in the end, James won. And that was the most perfect revenge of all.